The controversial, to put it mildly, I think, plans to change the country's asylum and immigration laws. A number of Conservative MPs are expected to vote against the government tonight. I'm speaking, of course, about the Nationality and Borders Bill. It's being debated in the House of Commons. This is, of course, after a number of amendments from peers in the Lords. Yesterday, Border Force officials stopped 213 migrants in the Channel, and there are reports that earlier today, a tiny baby were among those that were picked up from a small boat. More than 3,000 people have travelled from France to the UK using this route so far this year. One of the most contentious parts of the Nationality and Borders Bill would see some asylum seekers processed abroad, also known as offshoring. Home Secretary Priti Patel wants to go ahead with offshoring, but former Minister David Davies among those MPs who are opposing the policy. He, by the way, joins Nigel Farage a bit later tonight. Michael Heaver, your thoughts on all of this? I was alluding to some of the figures earlier on. 30,000 people across the Channel last year. This year so far, 3,000, which is 3 times the number this time last year. It's going up and up. Certainly doesn't show any signs at all of stopping or slowing down. How are we going to deal with all of this?
Well, you're absolutely right, Michelle. I mean, we've seen the numbers go up for a number of years now. As we know, last year it was 28,000 people. Some of the forecasters this year it could be upwards of 60,000 people. And Priti Patel, as Home Secretary, we've seen this go up year after year after year. And she has come out and Boris have come out time and time again and said, well, just wait for the Nationality and Borders Bill, what we're talking about here, and that will solve this, that will stop the numbers. Whether that does or not, we'll have to wait and see. But there's absolutely no doubt that there's widespread British public support to crack down on this, to stop this dangerous situation from getting even worse. We look at the Australian example, of course. In the end, if you send out the message, there's no point coming across illegally via this route because you will not be allowed to stay. Ultimately, that is how you solve this. We saw Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, say, if you truly want to reform human rights in this country, you have to leave the ECHR. It looks like the Home Secretary isn't going anywhere near that at the moment. But look, the fact is, this issue, if Priti Patel and Boris Johnson don't stop this, by the time of the next general election, this could well cost the Conservatives the next election. Because people are looking at this and thinking, if economic migrants paying gangsters large amounts of money to come across on boats from a safe country in France, if the government are powerless to stop this and we simply see the numbers continue, that is not good enough. And I would actually shame the French, who, of course, we've given tens of millions of pounds to. We've seen the French authorities on the beaches at times watch these crossings go on. I would have actually shamed the French by revoking French fishing licences for their failure to stop and actually take the boats back to France. Yes, the French would have gone absolutely potty with that. We may finally have had a solution. This has been allowed to go on and escalate and become even more dangerous, and it has to stop.
Peter Edwards?
Britain's Guantanamo Bay. Not my words, the words of a Tory MP who will rebel against the government tonight. People shouldn't be crossing the Channel. It puts the lives of men, women and children at risk. We all know Priti Patel and the government have failed on this, and I really don't like some of the macho rhetoric that's come from the government. This government and other Tory governments since 2010 have had an incredibly hostile tone about immigration of all types, whether that's asylum or economic migration through traditional routes. The government are failing on this, but let's take the kind of party politics out of it and just recognise that lives of men, women and children are at stake. I was really worried as well to hear my fellow panellist talk about economic migrants. This is about asylum seekers, people fleeing war, dying in the sea.
Yeah, hang on. Do be clear about what we're talking about here. This is people fleeing France. That's ultimately where these people are coming from.
That's not their country of origin, though.
I didn't say it was their country of origin. I said that this is where they are. I mean, I use the word fleeing loosely, but they are leaving France.
But Michelle,
Lisa.
wouldn't everybody be fleeing France? I'm not saying anything about France. I like France.
But that's a bit harsh. No. I think there's a lot of French people in France that are quite happy there.
I love France. I'm not saying anything about France. But, the Ukraine refugees are coming through Poland. They are, and they will eventually come through Belgium or France to get to the UK. So what are we saying the same about them? So
am I saying what about that?
So And I actually agree with David Davis that we should not be having offshoring at all. I think we should be much better than that. But what I am saying is, you know, there needs to be routes that are safe for migrants to come through. Clearly, our borders are, and I know we've had this debate on here before, and I've said that our borders are safe and strong, because if there wasn't, you wouldn't get all these people coming over on boats. You know, you don't get on a boat and pay a people smuggler everything that you've got, you know, for no reason at all. So what I'm saying is that the whole system needs to be looked at. I agree with that. I don't want people on boats. But what I'm also saying is, in order to get to the UK, because we are on an island, there is always a country you're going to come through. So, you know, the Ukraine refugees are coming through Poland or and Belgium to get here. So other migrants from other countries that are fleeing war as well, you know, they are also coming through France. So I think that French argument about, you know, they're leaving a safe place to get here, I think that argument's now been crushed.
See, I don't think it's been crushed. I think it's a very essential argument, actually, because for me, if you are in a safe place, then you're not fleeing a war anymore. You're then making an economic choice. And I don't blame them, by the way. No. Who wouldn't want to? Who wouldn't want to sit there and say, I want the best for my life?
Yeah.
I mean, most people want the best for their life. So I'm not criticising a motivation. What I'm saying is we do need to be honest about often what is the motivation. If you're in a safe place, for me personally, the sentiment that I'm now fleeing a war, that's been parked for a moment because I've left the war and I'm in somewhere that is safe. If I then want to proceed from there for economic reasons, not saying there's anything wrong with that, who wouldn't want to be economically affluent and have the best opportunities, but that is very different for me personally. Michael?
But of course there's a massive difference here, because those that are fleeing Ukraine now and coming, and you know,
What's
we've
the
got.
difference?
I'll tell you what the route is. The difference is because you have official, legal, sanctioned routes that are safe for everyone, and that should be the priority. Instead of, at the moment, we're paying millions of pounds per day on hotels for people who just decided to get on a boat, pay some gangsters, and come across from France. Are those really the people that we should be spending millions of pounds every day on? Well, that's the reality of what's happening.
No, that's not the reality.
Criminals are making huge amounts of money from this.
That's a poor description of clearly desperate people who you do not take.
France is not that bad. They're funding criminal gangs.
Well, if you are living in a tent in that side of in France, then that is pretty bad.
But do you think it's right then that we're paying millions of pounds per day on hotels for people who come across this route, which could lessen how much we can help people coming through the official route? Let me add a bit of insight into this millions of pounds, by the way. So the UK is currently spending, as of February anyway, £4.7 million per day, £4.7 million per day on hotel accommodation. Now, what this covers is £1.2 million a day on, remember the Afghan situation, lots of refugees from there. So the figures are apparently 1.2 million a day to accommodate Afghan refugees in hotels, and another 3.5 million a day is spent on asylum seekers in hotels.
Well, can I answer that point? Because I think left or right, we'd all say, we'd all question whether that's value for money for taxpayers. But the point is, I
wouldn't question it. To me, it's absolutely...
I agree with that. I mean, this is where I agree.
It's a broken system, right? We'd rather pay much less, but we'd rather have a better, more humane, more compassionate system for victims of torture, people fleeing war-torn countries, victims of rape. The system
Do you think there's
broken.
Do you think people are abusing the system, Peter?
I don't know enough about it. I think there's clearly scope for it to be abused. That's undeniable.
But if you had to hazard a guess, I mean, do you think that there are people that perhaps are motivated to come to the UK? So I'm always interested in pull factors. So do you think, because one of the things Priti Patel will say, Peter, in my mind, rightly so, is that you've got to reduce the pull factors to the UK. So when I think of, I don't know, what people get, like I know in Hull, for example, I can think of a hotel that is quite a nice hotel that most people in Hull wouldn't be able to afford to stay in for a prolonged period of time. But that has now been turned over for use to asylum seekers, economic migrants, refugees, whatever we want to call these people. And it's costing us a fortune. As we just said, they're nearly £5 million a day in this country.
Michelle, without being too flippant, asylum seekers haven't read a travel brochure about East Yorkshire.
But you see, I think that's a silly point to make, because you're telling me that a lot of people that get on these dinghies in France, they don't know that actually if you can make it to the UK, you'll be put up in a hotel, you'll get about 40 quid a week or whatever it is, you'll get looked after, you'll get fed, you'll get clothed. You're telling me people don't know that?
Could you live on 40 quid a week?
That's if I was put up in a hotel, if I was being fed, if I wasn't actually having much expenditure, then I absolutely could probably live on a reduced income. But that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making, I'm asking you about pull factors to the UK. Do you think that we need to reduce them?
I think there are pull factors. I think there's an economic argument to be had, but I'm far more worried about men, women and children dying in the sea.
But if someone, I don't want anyone to die in the sea, by the way, but making a choice to get in a dinghy and cross to the UK is indeed a choice, isn't it?
We all make choices and we may not make good ones when we're desperate, but I don't think, and I'm not suggesting you are, but I don't think we should condemn them for making that choice.
I think there's like a wider point about the way that our system treats many different people. And, you know, we've talked about those hotels. I stay in those hotels a lot because I live in Nottingham and I work in Luton. So I'm staying in hotels where there are lots of, asylum seekers living in them. And it is a shame that that's what we do. That's what we do with them. You know, it's a shame that that's what's happened. We don't have a good system. And this is where I probably agree with everyone, is that the system that we have is not working. And so rather than, having debates about offshoring and should we build... I mean, David Davis today, I heard him on another programme, and he was talking about how much it would actually cost to offshore people. And he said it would be cheaper to put them up in the Ritz and send the kids to Eton than it would be to send them offshore. It would be
4,000 miles away to Ascension Island, because so many other countries have already turned down Britain's request.
So all of this is a bad system. And I don't know why in Parliament tonight they can just have a debate and say the whole system is bad.
Well, I don't think anyone would suggest that the system's good.
No.
Or working.
So why are they tinkering at the edges all the time and instead of actually really having a look at the system?
But you know, as well, Michael, I think there's almost, to me, you almost need two systems. You need if I think about my business head, I would say you need a business as usual system. So you've got an asylum seeker system that kind of operates and is consistent, all the rest of it. Then you almost need to have an emergency system. Because to me, what's happening in the Channel right now, and we've just described these numbers to you, it is out of control. I would actually say it's a crisis. If you've got, we had 30,000 people, if you've got... it can be up to 1,000, actually, a day crossing the Channel. That, to me, is an emergency situation, and you must have processes, laws, etc., that allow you to deal with that. I personally, and I know this is very controversial, and I know a lot of you will completely wholeheartedly disagree with me, as indeed you're right, I would have a turn-back system, and I would make it very clear to anyone and everyone, if you choose to make a Channel crossing, there will be no consideration of an asylum process. So if you enter the country by the route of the Channel, you will not even be considered for asylum. And then that leads to your point, Lisa, that in order to do that properly, you must then have an effective system elsewhere so that people can then claim asylum using a different route. Yeah. But Michael...
Look, Michelle, I agree with you there. And I would think, everyone here on this panel, I think, agrees that we don't want to see this continue. The fact is, this hasn't just continued, it's got worse, a lot worse, year after year after year. As I said, it was 28,000 last year. This year, the forecast is 60,000 plus. So it's all right to criticise Priti Patel's Nationality and Borders Bill, but what is the alternative that people are putting forward? My argument is you need strong deterrence, a clear message. If you use this route, you won't be allowed to stay. So there's absolutely no point paying gangsters to bring you across in the first place.
But you know what I found out, Peter? Answering the question, is it legal or illegal to get on a boat in France and come over to the country, to the UK, it's quite hard, actually, to find definitive answers as to whether or not that's legal or illegal. Because for a long period of time, it was described as illegal. You couldn't just get on a boat and randomly come to the UK and try and claim asylum, etc. And actually, it's not illegal. It is legal to do that. And I think this is one of the problems. And again, I always say to my viewers, it's a jolly good job that I'm not in charge of the country. But if I was in charge of the country, one of the things that I would do is make that crossing illegal and say, actually, you can't do that. You simply just can't do that. I would make it almost impossible for people to be able to cross the channel and claim asylum in this country.
How would you do that when France is in the EU and the journey involves French waters?
Well, what I would do, as I've just explained, and I know it's controversial, and I know that many of you will be watching this, shouting at your TV and thinking I'm an awful person. I understand that, and you're entitled to your view. I would have turned back. So I wouldn't actually have people.
How could you make it illegal when Britain couldn't act unilaterally to make that journey?
I'd police my water. That's what I'm saying. I'd police my borders. So I would actually turn back. So if I got sight or wind, actually, of a dinghy coming up to my border, I'd be doing turn back the way that Australia was doing turn back in what they call Operation Sovereign Border. I wouldn't let people cross the channel, cross into the border. And I would make absolutely damn sure, I'd say, if anyone actually managed to evade, well, it wouldn't be me, but my system, and you did make it to the shores, I would just say there is no opportunity for you to claim asylum if your route of entry to this country was via the channel.
And would you do that unilaterally or in cooperation with France?
Well, France, to be fair to France, and I'm going to be completely unfair to France, I think that they are completely useless. We've sent tens of millions of pounds to these people, French government, to stop them actually, or to request them that they stop people doing this. It's made hardly any difference whatsoever. So I would just take responsibility for my own border.
But in your nautical border post, are you doing that unilaterally or are you cooperating with France?
Well, I think I would ignore the French in lots of ways. I would be saying to France, ultimately, it's in the French interest to let these people leave their shores, because then it's no longer a problem for the French. So I would take responsibility for my border. I'm repeating myself because I think I'm being incredibly clear in what I'm saying.
I'm challenging you because it sounds completely impractical.
But I don't think it is impractical. It's been demonstrated to work in Australia. They have Operation Sovereign Border. One of the component parts of this is Operation Turnback. Another part of this is them saying that actually if you do enter Australia via that water, you won't be granted asylum, full stop.
I'm sorry,
so
I think that's a very poor precedent because Australia is a different country. And
so what? I think it's a good precedent. It's mine. You're very much... You tell me at home, what do you think? Do you agree with me or do you think I'm talking nonsense? Peter thinks I'm talking nonsense, don't you, Peter?
I just said I was challenging your proposal rather than it was nonsense.
Are you pleased that I'm not in charge of the immigration policy in this country?
Well, you stood for Parliament, so you might be.
What would you do, by the way?
Well, I do think it is incredibly tough, and I'm completely happy to admit that there isn't a simple solution. I think you've got to dump the macho rhetoric that the government have used, and I do think I completely accept Brexit. I don't want to have another referendum, but I think we have to work with Europe to pick up on one of the points you said, which was to limit the pull factors and then force a system that treats asylum seekers legally, but also with compassion.